Julian Emanuel is BTIG's chief equity and derivatives strategist. Julian, good to see you.
Great to be with you, Melissa.
So are you saying this because you also believe, like the traders, that the 10-year yield is settled into a range at this point? Is that what we've become sort of dependent on in terms of forecasting the tech trade?
Well, it's been a big part of the story the entire year, for sure. And frankly, from our point of view, we have been more bearish on bonds in general than the street as a whole, always ahead of consensus. Our year-end yield forecast is 2%. But if you look at it, and Tim pointed this out, is that we spent the last couple of weeks in a range. So we're going higher, but we're grinding higher rather than shooting higher. And frankly, when you think about it, that's really a lot of the story of the month of March. And I go back to the last time I was on your show at the beginning of March, and it was very, very frightening for a lot of people to hear us make the call that we thought selective big cap tech could do well. But lo and behold, people are starting to focus once again on the idea that FAANG in particular are secular earnings growers in an environment where the discount to the multiple doesn't need to be as punitive, because you're not going to 2.5% or whatever in the 10-year yield imminently.
Should investors be focused at this point, Julian, on the possibility of a corporate tax increase, or is it too early?
No, it's not too early. And history is pretty conclusive about this, is that particularly when you raise both corporate and individual tax rates in the same year, stocks tend to underperform. And so when you think about it from the broad index level, we've already had a good first 3 months. It wouldn't surprise us at all if, within the context of large cap tech continuing to do well, that you do have some give back from this value trade that's gone a long way, and that leaves the index range bound in the near term.
Hey, Julian, Bonawyn here, and early happy Easter to you. Thanks for joining. So you mentioned that healthcare might be an area of future strength. And I think this whole pandemic situation has really highlighted both the pros and cons of our current healthcare system. Would you mind drilling down a little bit and letting us know what pockets of healthcare you think have upside?
Well, yeah. And so if you think about it, healthcare has been a very sort of strange sector to think about, because it's neither the value trade per se, nor is it the growth trade. And when you think about it in those terms, the nexus is the fact that healthcare as a sector is intertwined with government oversight and government regulation to a very large degree. But the fact is that we're coming into an environment where the economy is going to open up again. Things are going to normalize. You're going to have people starting to go to elective procedures more than has been the case for the last 2 years. There's certainly pent-up demand there as well. This new telehealth type environment is not likely to go away anytime soon either. So we think there's really a number of areas, including if we consider that the rate of change of the 10-year yield isn't going to be too onerous. Large cap pharma, which tends to be a yield play, but given what we've seen in the last year, is likely has elements of a growth play as well.
Hey, Julian, we had a meme, as Guy likes to put it, on this show recently, where we had a dog and we had the dollar and we had, tail, dog, so as it relates to yields and as it relates to the market, your view on the dollar. We've had a bounce. Is that off oversold levels, or is that a dollar that's reasserting itself? Because that has huge implications for multiple asset classes.
And it definitely does, Tim. What we would say there is, if you think about the dollar rally within the context of the commodity markets, the two tend to work together. And the fact that the commodity markets haven't really come off materially in the wake of the dollar strength tells us that it's really much more of a sort of position correction, oversold bounce that we think ultimately, particularly as the plans for President Biden's next round of infrastructure spend come more into focus, that the dollar downtrend will reassert itself.
Julian, I wanted to circle back to the selective FAANG names that you like. In theory, they're there are 5 names in FAANG, so selective amongst this list is only a handful of names at this point. Can you walk us through how you're thinking about it? Is it percentage off of their highs? Because all of them are double-digit percentages off their highs. Is it value? Is it multiple? Is it the degree to which their multiples have compressed? How do you think about which FAANG names?
So when we originally came up with this concept at the beginning of March, our view was the peak of value versus growth essentially was the beginning of September. And what we saw is the broader market was up substantially since then, but there was a range of names, and actually some of the largest semi names, which you talked about earlier in the show, are included there as well, is that they were down sort of double digits in that time. At the same time, the expectation is for double-digit earning growth over the course of 2021. We weren't really too much concerned about the actual multiple at the time, because by and large, even though you can always say that these names are expensive, they're not expensive relative to where they were, and they're not expensive relative to the point in time that a lot of people fixate on as being the risk point in time, that being late 1999, 2000, and think of it in those terms.
Okay, Julian, good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Julian Emanuel of BTIG. He likes healthcare. Karen, you like healthcare too.
Yes, I'm very in sync with Julian. I don't know that I've felt this in sync with him ever, but you know, I like the FAANGs, and I do like healthcare. I think a lot of what he said makes sense to me, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I think, you know, I don't normally like things for a dividend yield, but the PEs are really low and the dividends are high, and it's not like the dividends are high because people are afraid they're going to get cut. They're legitimate dividends. So I like that space.
I feel like Julian might be...
I've increased my exposure a lot.
Well, and we'll talk about that more a little bit later on. I feel like Julian might be blushing out there with how in sync Karen is with him. Guy, in terms of FAANG names, which FAANG names selectively would you like here?
Facebook, I admit, it pains me. You can see it on my face?
Every time you say that.
Pains me to say it. Yeah, but it's and you know, Facebook is, listen, it's right there now, right on the all-time high. And by the way, I don't know what the difference between a meme and a GIF is, but a lot of people are sending them vis-a-vis Twitter about cats. Loosen up, folks. It was a joke, number one. And you mentioned NSYNC. I know for a fact that Justin Timberlake is a huge fan of the show, and he's probably blushing right now as well, along with Julian.
I'm sure.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.